Welcome. This is the February 18th Jalen Zones production user call. We have Noor, Mark, DCH, LGA, Jan, and myself, Michael. And Noor has kindly reminded us that the OCI calls are back in action every 2 weeks, and there will be one next Monday. Noor, if you have a link for that, drop it in the chat. Otherwise, hopefully people can find that without too much trouble. And there was big news last week. The Kleen Elixir-based container management system for FreeBSD landed, and we have a guest today. Lasse, and I welcome you to introduce yourself and the project.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Lasse, and I have been a happy FreeBSD user for 12, 15 years, and been a happy jail user as well. And then at some point, Docker came to my attention, and they kind of, at least from my perspective, improved a lot on the whole kernel virtualization approach. So I can't really remember when, but many years ago I started to try and build something for FreeBSD because I think it had all the primitives with jails and CFS, which has then come to Linux as well. But it had all the building blocks for making a very nice container management to be a nice container management platform. Yes, I started this work many years ago. Did all kinds of prototypes. I actually made the first one in Erlang, and then switched to Elixir instead. And then I had kind of a leave of absence for a year from work, and then I really gave it a go and tried to kind of make a similar tool as Docker. So having the same abstractions with containers, networks, images, etc. And a very user-friendly command line interface, but still being very true to all the primitives of FreeBSD, so using JALs and PF and CFS. Yes, and the backend is written in Elixir, and the client is written in Python. So I guess that's it very briefly. And then once I kind of had a finished release candidate, I tried to see if I could to get it into the ports system. And then I was kind of stuck, and I kind of started working again, and everything was a bit stale. And then it got some attention, as you mentioned, Michael, a week ago, which has been really nice and really motivating, because I've been a bit of a one-man army on this, and would really like to have some discussions and feedback, and of course a lot of testing and bugs if possible. And now I can see you are browsing through the documentation. I've tried to actually
Beautiful.
I cloned the Docker docs to kind of, because I really enjoyed the documentation, and I think it was really important to put a lot of effort into that, and adapting all the guidelines and so on. I might have overdone it a little bit, I'm not sure, but at least there's a lot of guides and how to, so you could also, if you're from the Linux world, you can kind of go into the documentation and start, and I've made a lot of references to FreeBSD main pages and the documentation, the excellent handbook, and so on and so forth. So I also had the little ambition that this could kind of bridge Linux and FreeBSD in that way.
I assume many users will ask the same question. CLE versus clean, what distinguishes that?
Yes. So I called the entire software project Kleen.
Okay.
It's actually after the mathematician Stephen Kleen because
Ah,
I have a background in the philosophy and mathematics. So that was just a little tribute to Stephen Kleen. And then Klee because it was kind of Klee, a Klee tool, and then cleaned for clean and demon.
the daemon, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Just
So
so there's no confusion. And clearly this got an infusion of excitement a few days ago as recently, and you've been working away on that, but it's still you as a one person army, as you put it.
yes.
Okay.
I have not actually communicated this to anyone. The plan was to see if I could get it into the ports system and then uh, write on IRC and emails and so on. But then that kind of staled, and then the whole plan staled. But Dave have helped a lot these last couple of days,
Fantastic.
so perhaps I can be on track on the plan.
That
Yeah,
is
the server
delightful. Go
bit
ahead.
just got committed now, about 30 seconds ago.
What did?
The server half, and
As a
I
port?
reminded Lewin, who's the
Okay.
person holding the other one up, if he's got a chance for it. But it's all good. We have an IRC channel to collaborate in. Anything is possible.
Uh, yeah, and I
Nice.
will reiterate something Noor said in chat. At the moment a bunch of us saw Elixir, we thought, "Oh, Dave, you've been holding out on us and not telling us about this project." And nope, that's fantastic. Let me fix that. So I didn't notice a clean versus Docker comparison. Are there any dramatic absences there? And before I jump into that, Nora, you've raised your hand. Feel free to jump in, please. Just it's your call, not
Thank
mine.
you. Yeah, the question was already there. I read about it. It's really cool. But is it only just a drop-in replacement for Docker, but not yet OCI compliant?
Yes, it's not OCI compliant. I've been looking a little bit at the work that's been going on in that regard. And the last time I've checked, and I must admit it is some time ago, but the last time I checked, it seemed like this was really work in progress. And I was really hoping that once the specification and all of that got perhaps more stable, and perhaps there would be some like OCI jail, I think it's called, or some similar backend component that I could use, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So I've been following it closely, but at the moment, no.
And if I'm not mistaken, that some of that stability has indeed arrived. And I think, Dave, perhaps you can best tell us if there are official, was it three different flavors of official OCI jail containers, I recall?
We've got ARM64 and AMD64 containers of 14.2, I guess. We don't have 14.1, 14.2 P1 or whatever we're up to now, because we're in the middle of doing the 13.5 release, and you can only do one thing at a time. Yeah. To be honest, I'm less concerned about point releases for containers because yeah, there's a lot less exploits and change in the ABI layer, and the kernel stuff is not what containers deal with.
I'll do a quick search of the doc for OCI. This came up just last week. There's a new repo and cryo. Let me drop the doc in the chat so that Lasse, you can take a peek at that. OCI jail and run G came up in chat. So that's been heating up in parallel to this effort of these calls. So I'm so glad that that's all just breaking through. OCI images. Here we go. So that's the three branches, variations. I was talking about the dynamic, minimal, and static. And Dave, you gave a great review of those in December, and that should be on the recordings. So that's what I was getting at. And augment containerd and run J. And of course, Dave, your documentation, which deserves a actual live link. Oops. And
it's a reminder to actually finish it. Yeah.
Hey, that's the tiny contribution I can make to all this. So, yeah. So to answer your question, Lasse, this is heating up, and the activity is there, and it's getting some formal blessing rather than a whole bunch of one-person armies scratching their own itches. So, feel free to survey that. I hope that can mesh nicely with what you're doing. Let's scroll back down to where we were. So, other questions for our guest?
So at the moment, this is a single node sort of thing. Have you had any thoughts about making it multi-node? So you'd have multiple jail hosts and yeah, what do we call that these days? Horizontally scalable, I think.
Yes. Very good question. Actually, that was one of the initial reasons for choosing the Beam. So that was definitely on the agenda when I started out. But then when I started to kind of just implement, I just followed both the backend API and the client format when I started to build Kleen, and then I quickly realized that just building that would take some time. So it's been a bit in the background, but that was definitely the reason for going this direction. And I've mostly been following Docker, but at the moment I kind of have ideas that diverge from that. So I kind of learned a lot doing this, and I have a lot of ideas to continue, and that is one of the pathways to choose.
Cool. So there's a really nice Erlang library called RA, which is extracted out of RabbitMQ, and it has a key value store on top of it called Kepri, but it's a raft consensus algorithm almost per process. You can think of it like as a per process raft consensus algorithm. And yeah, it then handles all of those nice things, like you can get every node to register what jails it has, but you can still just query and it magically knows where the leader is and will return you a list of the consolidated results. So I've done some work on that elsewhere, and I can share that at some point. It's pretty cool. Yeah. But it's really nice consensus. And at RabbitMQ scale, it's gotten a lot more use than we need for containers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jan, you have a question?
Yes. My question would be, what is the scope for the distributed runtime? Let's say, is it just an API you can target on each server and then some control plane driving it? Or are you truly asking for like in old Sun advertisements, the network is the computer kind of distributed jail runtime where it just auto scale stuff, restarts failed jails, and eventually may even replicate the file system so that you can restart on a different server and so on, and pretend that you don't have to deal with failures of the application until you do.
Good question again. And to be honest, I haven't given it that much thought. I guess I had two ideas where you just had some, and that is a very vague idea, but having a distributed system that was kind of making sure that all the nodes are up and so on and so forth, and keeping as little maintenance for the user as possible. But how to actually do that in practice, I haven't really thought through. But one of the motivations was that I have a feeling that Kubernetes, for instance, is very complex. And if it was possible to make something much more simple, like I think Docker was initially, that would be kind of the guiding principle in however you would implement it.
Was there a second variation on that, second idea?
More like focusing on specifying redundancy, very hard coding that, and making some very complicated configuration as to how the cluster should function, making it less automated and thus user friendly. But as I say, it's really vague, and some time ago I kind of dropped thinking about it. That would definitely require more than me to kind of discuss that, because I think it's much more complex task than writing Docker, and that was complex enough in itself.
Jan, is your hand still up from before? And welcome, Rod. And your hand is down. Rod, we're going through the Elixir-based Kleen jail management system that aims to be a bit like Docker with using FreeBSD primitives. Hopefully that's an accurate description. Other questions for our guest Lasse, who will hopefully be attending more than these as time goes on.
Yeah, so despite doing the port, I haven't actually looked at the code at all yet. So one of the questions was, how do you deal with that jails need to be started as root, and your control plane then is sort of in a language which is maybe less secure than perhaps we'd want. Yeah, so how do you launch the jails currently?
At the moment, they are launched as root using the jail command line interface.
Okay, so jails, yeah.
And I agree, it's been quite a pain that's the way you can do it, and I've not been aware of any other way of doing it. So I would be really interested in that. I've tried, of course, to implement TLS in every possible way to kind of mitigate that, but I'm not entirely happy about that.
Yeah, there's unfortunately we still don't have user what's the word I'm thinking for, non-root jails, which you do have on Linux. So the only thing I'm aware of that sort of helps mitigate that is Florian Wobser from OpenBSD has written a lot of their privilege separated daemons, and he's a pretty solid blog post on how he does that, and that's maybe one way of tackling it. So you sort of have this kind of three parts. You have the daemon does the privilege stuff, it's got to run as root. Then you have a process in between which starts up, drops privileges, and only communicates over standard in and standard out with a standard message protocol. And then you have the other end that wants to talk to it, and you sort of send messages through the pipe to the daemon. There's a great article. I'll link the article.
If you want to just invoke a known set of commands, you can also just write a sudo snippet and then include that from your sudo conf and run it as your user, and your user is allowed passwordless sudo for these commands, and the command would read the, let's say, jail name you want to start or stop from just standard in on one line. It's not as scalable, but for the, let's say, overhead involved with starting a non-trivial jail or stopping it, and so on. Going through sudo isn't a performance issue because you're starting all via c.d scripts and so on once inside the jail. It's more of a problem for the network management. There, in theory, if you want to re-implement all of that complexity, you have the OCI specifications for things like container network providers, the CNI for and the CSI for container storage interface and the CNI for container network interface. One of them is a fairly simple protocol. The other one is sadly a bit over-engineered when it comes to serializations with using protobufs and so on, while the other is just write a bit of JSON here, read a bit of JSON back, and yeah.
Thank you,
gRPC and so on.
A question.
Please.
That trick is on, or that approach, which they also have it for VMM on OpenBSD. It will just allow you that you can start a virtual machine in this case while you're not root, but it will not tackle the container itself will run still as root.
That's intentional normally, and you can't really run a super userless jail unless you run only your own application in it, because all of the FreeBSD rc.d subsystem goes through SU and the like, which means basically all rc.d scripts will fail to set things like locking classes into daemon and so on, which are all privileged operations. And if you run the jail without super user, you can't do that anymore. And all the rc.d scripts, even the trivial ones, which are read-only, will fail because they want to set up a bit of metadata with a privileged system call. And if you're not privileged, bad luck.
I agree. Go ahead.
The other thing you can do is you can write your own little helper daemon, bind it to a Unix socket, and then have that be used by your less privileged daemon. So instead of doing the OpenBSD way, where it's still basically one daemon, although the more complex ones don't just fork and then privsep, but fork and re-exec or potentially exec into some other binary. But you have a kind of static relationship with one parent supervising the children, similar to also what postfix or Dovecot does. You have, or Postgres, where you have the master process which binds the resources and so on. And in the case of, for example, postfix, you can, and sometimes it's recommended for things like special purpose spam filters or something, to hook into that process supervisor, which is the postfix master daemon. And but you don't have to make it that static. You could also just do it over a Unix socket in a well-known location if you want a more microservice architecture. That way you can test the features easier. But it's also a bit harder to deploy unless you have good automation to deploy it. And yes, I did mean the IMSG you've shown. That's the IPC library they're using. And it's usable on FreeBSD
okay. I mean,
because...
Go ahead, Noor.
You were saying,
go ahead.
So,
sorry, I wasn't intending to go into. Oh, sorry.
I'm lag.
Lag.
IMSG is the OpenBSD helper library where they factored out the IPC into a fairly simple library to make it easier to write privilege separated daemons which run as multiple processes. Because it's tedious and annoying to set up and do the deserialization. what we have in FreeBSD instead, which OpenBSD doesn't have, is libenv, or even as part of OpenZFS libenv pair. It's basically slightly different takes on an almost identical API. It's a way to serialize your dynamic data structures, including ones with attached file descriptors, and exchange them. So it's a very flexible RPC building block, but it's only on FreeBSD where you can rely on it to be always there, which for jail runtime isn't a big issue. Someone is creating an echo for me. And yeah, IMSG is in theory a bit more portable and has less extra complexity, but it also does less for you when it's still flexible. And the other thing which is often overlooked is the old external data representation library. Every kind of Unix has inherited as part of NFS. It's specified in POSIX. It's a bit tedious to use, but you can use it, and it's RPC, basically do man-free RPC.
Jump in rather than raise your hands. I will often miss those. And
I wasn't intending to go into a possible solution because, of course, it's not that easy not to crack. But what I wanted to point to that rootless containers on Linux are much more than just that you can run start container as non-root, that the containers themselves run as non-root. There's just a bit of difference. So
we do have that in FreeBSD. One of the jail parameters is the disabled super user privilege, so that even if you have user ID 0, you're not privileged inside the jail. And then you can basically start and you're logged into that user. And then, yes, you have user ID 0, but you can't do anything special with it.
Cool, okay.
But
what was the FreeBSD similar tool?
To what?
You mentioned libenv or MV. I couldn't hear you.
Libenv
_MV.
yes. No, you've already found it.
That's him. Okay, cool. Thank you.
It's a way you can build arrays and key value maps and a handful of primitive types up into like, let's say, JSON-like object model, and then serialize that. There's kernel support, still some of the more modern, complicated system calls exchange NV lists instead of custom things. I think of it, the problems we have with mount and then the nmount system call, where you have an IO vector, but an IO vector of key value pairs, like for example the jail command, uses to pass to the jail _set system call, only is one level of nesting. Whereas if you need lists of lists, then it becomes very annoying because now you have to reinvent the wheel again. And yeah, so for example, ZFS uses the Open Solaris version of that called libenv pair. It has a few more data types, but does basically the same thing. It clashes on function names, so you can only link against one. And it's not part of FreeBSD because directly it's in the config directory because it's under CDDL instead of BSD and so on. But that library here, if you start from scratch, there's no downside to picking the one which is not private to OpenZFS, basically. Yeah, there are tons of libraries like this. Or if your language has a built-in one, like in Go, it would be easy to use something like gRPC. In every other language, it's a pain. I'm sure Elixir, or at least Erlang, has its own mechanism to do similar things.
Cool. So speaking of
two
Elixir,
Erlang clusters can talk to each other at a higher level than just unstructured byte streams over a TCP socket.
Okay. Any other questions regarding Kleen?
I'm good. We just have to have more time to do some testing and give it a spin. Thanks very much, Lasse, for all the work to, I guess, a year's worth or more to put this all together.
The downside of all of the approaches I mentioned is that they're written in C. So, and in Erlang or Alex, you probably want something written in the language or part of the runtime instead of having to do more foreign function calls or using a kind of service port.
Yes.
So I will reiterate what Dave said about thank you on all this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And do take a look at that OCI work. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised from the last.
And I have one question in that regard. So when we are talking about OCI, I've also seen some work, and once again, it's some time ago, so please correct me, but I've seen some work on the networking part as well, which I think is kind of also really essential for this. And if I recall correctly, Podman uses the CNI or the Podman port, and there's been some work on porting into some new way of doing it that was not CNI but NetAwk or something like that.
That's correct. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, Podman doesn't intend to remove CNI, but just switch the default CNI provider.
No, it's a yes and no. So for whatever reason, Podman community decided that CNI is pretty or becoming pretty Kubernetes aligned more than to their liking, at least according to some published articles on Red Hat. So they started their own container networking instead. That's NetAwk indeed, and that's in Rust. But as Jan said, at the beginning they said they will deprecate CNI. We thought that they will just remove the support, but it's still there. But by default, the supported networking stack is NetAwk, unless you reconfigure through Podman configuration that it still uses CNI.
How do you spell that? NetAwk?
Just a sec.
Sure.
NetAwk. Yes.
NetAwk. Like an aardvark, but networky.
Actually, there is an aardvark for DNS service. And that's NetAwk for the core networking.
Got it.
We're still busy on fully supporting that. At the moment, out of the box, that work from Doug, he ported CNI and he built additional custom CNI plugins to work with his Podman port as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's actually, well, it's being fully tested, but it should work for most of the cases out of the box without any issues. The CNI one.
Lasse, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Why Elixir and why not Go and Rust like everybody else?
Or Zig? Come on.
Or Zig.
Hashim or
it's
why not?
a lot of interest.
Go ahead. Let him answer and take a break.
The idea was actually, as Dave also asked earlier, because it was had this built-in distribution functionality was one of the reasons, and then because I thought it was a great language, and lastly, I kind of felt that it could be nice to try and, because I think, as I also experienced, it took quite some time to make what I did, and using a high-level language provided probably me with a lot of speed. So, for instance, I wrote the first one of the client. I made several POCs. I wrote it in Go, but I thought it was really heavy to use, and I got so much more features out the pipe using Python. So I think I wouldn't have come as far if I've used Rust or Go or something like that.
Rewrite it in assembler, please.
Ah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, we know. Anyway, fantastic work. Everyone do track that. Do take a peek at OCI progress, and I think we have something exciting upon us, especially if it is familiar on various levels to Docker users. because having them completely change their metaphors and such is not helpful. And for what it's worth, can one bring any Docker tooling straight to it, or be it scripts, be it containers, be it whatever? And of course, we have compat Linux. So cool. I hope we see you on future calls, and just chime in as appropriate. Mark, do you want to take a moment to talk about patch quality in PRs? That's technically come up this call with the little security issue we talked about before the recording. And I suspect Rod might have an opinion on this. So Mark, I guess lay out the
what I've
issue
been
you're trying to
doing.
address. Go ahead.
So what I've been doing is looking through and evaluating historical patches in Bugzilla to see how easy it would be to create a tool to look at them and say, yes, this is a patch that applies, or no, this is a patch that does not apply. And I talked about it with Jan earlier, but I've actually been working on that and implemented it, and it's now at the is this good enough stage. And the current question before the assembly, and I want to ask Warner, is how much work do you find that you have to do on existing PRs, such as rebase them to a useful thing before it becomes too frustrating to use it? So that's the latest thing. The ratio of ports PRs to source PRs is about 8-to-1, and if you mix them together, this thing is getting about 92% right. If you take only kern PRs, it's getting around 50% right, but it's higher the more recent you get, and the further back you go, the less and less it gets. I don't know exactly how accurate it is, say, if I fed it kern from the last 2 years. I suspect it would be 60-70%. So that's my current research project. Is it worth? Well, how much effort is it worth to try to get the marginal PR?
Yeah, I can really only speak mostly for ports, and generally ports by their nature tend not to conflict too much, but it would be really valuable to have that perspective from people who maintain Firefox, Chromium, and KDE and Qt stuff, because those are sort of the really big heavy users, because it's a very different kettle of fish. But port's generally okay, and for source stuff, I don't touch that enough for it to be a problem. Yeah.
So here's the problem: is that we have not established a demand that our users base these at a certain level in the hierarchy. With ports, it's pretty easy to guess, right? And with source, it isn't, because the current PRs are all over the place. And the question is, at what point do you try to add more code to go through and say, okay, well, just give me the file name, show me where the file name is, and try to modify the patch on the fly to see if it will work with that path? Or at what point do you just say, your patch is bad and you should feel bad, and go re-roll your patch?
Well, that's pretty much the policy for reviews, is it not?
I do not know.
I've observed that behavior, right or wrong.
Well, it's, to the extent that the computers can do this work for us, they should. The question becomes, you're introducing code that could be fragile to the analysis tool. Is it better for the analysis tool just to say, I can't do this, or is it better for the analysis tool to grovel around and try to find what the original poster intended?
I'm guessing we can have completely terrible patches that apply and build perfectly.
Well, okay, that's not the quality I'm talking about. I'm talking about the quality of them as can it be applied as a patch. This
Okay,
doesn't take
got
the human factor out of it. I think it would be a disaster if we automated this and said any patch that comes in, you can throw out. Now, what I've been doing as a stress test is saying, okay, well, here's several thousand PRs, well, several hundred PRs.
Yeah.
Gobble through the list and tell me how well you did. But that's not a realistic case, and so I can produce a diff that has 10,000 lines and go through source diff that has 10,000 lines and go through it and immediately spot stuff that's like, no, the patch algorithm didn't work, or this is just madness, or etc. So it's a tool, and the question is, how much coverage does the tool need to get before it's a useful tool? And I don't have a good. I would have to have been a source committer for a number of years to know how much work it takes to fix these things up in the first place. That's the question I'm asking.
Rodney,
Well,
if you're
the
free, do you have
open
any
question,
comments? And Noor, do you have any thoughts there?
The only thing I can think about, and it's too late in the game, unfortunately, would be to change the submittal process or enhance the submittal process, so that we're collecting more versioning data initially. And one of those would be, just like we do in code reviews, is request that all diffs be full file context, which would have meant in prior history that we had a file version number, which has now been removed. So I can't even given a whole file, I can't tell you what version of FreeBSD that file came from.
Well, there's a couple of things, and again, this is another question about how far do you torture the code to the code in this test tool before you're way in the weeds. The source PRs do have a version field, right? And
No,
so
that's human. That's done by a human.
That's done by a human. Sometimes they just put current. And so if you wanted to do some automated thing where you checked out a get tree at a particular time, we could do that. And I was thinking about doing that at first and talked about it with Jan, but I now think that is insane and is going to give more false positives than true positives. But I mean, the version information can be derived if you wish to, but how many false positives are there going to be? I don't know.
That's my rather would have been to enhance the submission process so that full file diffs were collected and we still had a $ID that meant something, because then that's a 100% nailed identifier on the file you're dealing with. And
well, the problem is that we now have 6,000 patches in Bugzilla that do not conform to that. So to me, it's not an interesting question. Yes, A, yes, B, it's not interesting.
Well, it wouldn't be that hard to automate something that went through those and push back a request to say, could you please resubmit the patch with and see what percentage you got. I mean, you might get, even if you got 20%, that's 1,200 of the 6,000 that would then be fully identifiable. I suppose you could actually, even with a full file, let me think about that. With a full file diff, you could create an MD5 of the original file and you could search for the file version by that. It's nasty, but.
If you use the SHA-1 hash, you may be able to get it out of the Git history. But we got rid of the per file versioning, but the per file versioning was removed after the Git import. So there is either a per file version you can find in Git, or we're in the modern-ish times. But yeah, if you just get
It-
a unified diff against the file without a file version, you're out of luck.
does if they have a Git tree, Git diff, doesn't that have the version of the file in the header?
Oh, if you have a git diff, yes, but if you only do a diff def dash
Okay,
u,
then do what I suggested. Write an automation around the PR system that goes through and finds these diffs and just adds a new entry to it. Please resubmit your diff as a Git diff so that we can automate
in my
things
opinion,
going forward
the right
and
thing
Let
to
him
do.
finish.
it at least revise the current policy. And Linux did this long ago. There's a patch submittal script and a set of things that say how you should be submitting these, and simply say that contact diffs and other diffs are not acceptable. You need to produce the Git diff so that at least things do not continue to deteriorate. Going forward, we would have more ability to do automation.
The proper way
Okay.
to do that with Git is Git format patch, where you do check out the code, you commit your local changes, and then each commit is basically one email, and you attach that.
Well, I'm
And
not advocating.
it's a diff with a bunch of metadata on top to make it an almost complete Git commit.
Yeah, I'm not.
So
I
these are
necessarily.
two separate things: automating the process and coming up with a policy. I think that coming up with a policy is far more important. On the other hand, what my remit is on this current project is to look at the historical patches. So yes, knowing how bad the historical patches are should lead to a policy, and that is also not the problem that I'm working on right now.
But Mark, if I may ask,
yes.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Take care, Dave.
What would be the criteria for a good patch from the past? That it compiles, that it passes.
The first level that I'm aiming for is, does the patch apply? Once you have that, then you can look at doing further QA for on ports. Of course, you could run make describe portland, but I'm not doing that part. I'm trying to limit it just to look at extracting historical patches.
Okay. A slight amount of metadata in any diff is the dates on the files in the diff header line. You do get a date of the old file, which kind of gives you a clue as to, well, it at least splits the search down. You know that it's not a FreeBSD version of that file newer than that date.
Okay, so here's the question. How much do you want to try to automate the script to do that search? And how much do you want to say, this is something that humans are better at than a bunch of code that may be fragile? I'm really very, very, very wary of writing fragile code that people then take as canonical. Portland, for example. Portland's a good suggestive tool, but if you slavishly use Portland's output, you're going to make a mess.
On a side note, Mark, do you like port format better?
I don't even know what port format is.
Port format is pretty cool. It provides suggested rearrangements for your make file.
Okay.
You have a link to that?
Let me find out where it's from.
Cool. Mark, you had some criteria, first of which was, does it apply? Do you have any other follow-ups, or is that your start? Does it build, I'm guessing?
No. Right now, it's what's the hot topic is, does it apply?
Okay.
And all the rest of it after that, I haven't gotten into. I'm trying to get this done. It's suggested that I get what I'm currently working on and the N different things done by the end of this month.
Got it.
So the question is, now we're down to, what's feasible and what isn't. Writing new submission code isn't feasible in 2 weeks.
Okay. If the criteria of does it apply, can we just simply say if does it apply to current?
How much time should I put into that task is the question. How many PRs are actually show up like that? And I don't have a number for you. I'm going through the results of all current PRs from all time right now. And there's a lot of output. No, it's like of the 600 it tries, 200 and some odd just work immediately. The patch still applies. But then there's a group that, people put like user source or home source or whatever, this nonsense is, prepend, a prepended directory. Yeah. And how much work do I do to try to intuit those things and rip them out? And how much work do I do to the things that only have a file name, try to prepend a path to that? And again, this is code that I'm pretty sure the code I did for ports, well, the stuff I did for ports is mostly correct. The stuff that I have for rewrites for the source stuff is embryonic. I know I'm gonna have to do one because everybody patches files in Etsy, but that's not where the files are in the repo. That's a step that's done by make install, right? Is to move things over to Etsy. So yeah, there has to be a rewrite rule for, here is a patch that starts with Etsy, rewrite. Well, prepend a path, and then try it. But I mean, it's the curve has really got to go like this. At some point, you have to say, well, that patch is just not good. So the question is, where is that? Is it? I mean, if we have to do that for 50% of patches, then the tool is useless. If we have to do it for 5% of the patches, is that good enough? And that's where I need more source committer experience to know when to stop looking for that marginal tail there.
Mark, you mentioned a ratio early on of like 8-to-1. Was that like ports to base or what?
Ports to base. And then there's some in doc, but that's like, so it's 8-to-1 to 0.3 or something. I'm not going to do the math in my head.
Got it. Thank you.
And source includes manual pages, which there's already a rewrite step to know that even though it says doc, it's actually in source. So that how it worked.
Got it. Okay. Has this helped? And it sounds like you were waiting for Warner to come online. I hope he has some good input for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, the question is, before, I turn people loose on it, is it useful?
And you suggested you have a tool at this time, or
what's
not
that?
Yet? You have a tool proof of concept at this time that you worked with Jan or something?
The tool exists and works, like I say, 92% for patches or for ports. And I do not know how well it works for source. It seems to work pretty well the more recent the PR is. And I'm still going through the output right now to try to figure out, at what point it's not worth to go back.
Is that a tool that's worth sharing at this time? Would that cause confusion and chaos?
No, because what would happen is people would immediately be like, well, why doesn't it do this? It's I know it doesn't do that.
I hear you. I hear you. Cool.
The baby birds, we used to call them the baby birds at a little startup I worked at. But the baby birds will be there instantly. So.
Cheep.
feed us, give us the latest. It's just like, look, I've got a list of 16 things I know I got to fix.
Yep, correct.
Cool.
Well, anything else at this time, or shall we call it good?
Wait, you're down to 60 things?
16 classes of errors.
Oh, classes of it. Okay.
Would it be worth providing markers somehow that say that here's the ones that have passed this test, and anything marked not without a human might want to look at and try and improve it so that your tool does in fact pass it? I mean, does that
I
make
demand
sense?
that humans I demand that a human looks at the output of this stuff no matter what, even if the patch applies.
Well, agreed, but at least let's separate those that already pass without humans modifying it into the group of class of things that do need to be modified to pass the test.
Right. Right now, I have output files that are thousands and thousands of lines long that are a running log of what it did, so I can isolate my errors and fix them. But the question, the question for where I want to be 2 weeks from now is how much hunting around in the tree do you want to do?
Okay.
Have the script do rather than have a human do.
Right. I don't like scripts doing much anything, but the
6,000 patches is not amenable to having a human look at them.
I don't know about that.
Rod, I'm gonna tell you, I've been doing this stuff on the PRs for 20 years, and I can only look at a few hundred of them at a time before my eyes cross.
I'll agree. I mean, but I would be majorly interested in what the fallout number is of the 6,000 or so patches that are in there. How many of them are currently apply automatically, and how many of them are currently have issue?
Correct.
Just that rough number is of interest because that gives it ON
well, like I say,
what the problem space is.
It's 92%.
How many of them can you apply?
Let me talk.
Let him finish. Jan, hold tight.
So the number for that seems to be 92% for all PRs starting at 2024-01-01. But that's the 8-to-1 ratio of ports to source. I am only now, from last night's run, looking through all current PRs, going back through starting with the most recent, going back through the logs and finding out how much of a mess it is. And I do know it's more of a mess the further you go back in time. But to what extent to apply effort to try to fix that, I don't know yet. Jan, I believe that would be an absolute catastrophe for Trojan horses. Now, I will say that I have fed thousands of ports into this thing and told it go ahead and patch it, and then did a make describe, and for reasons that I simply astonish me, it worked. So, but given a lot of the new ports, they don't submit patches to the category make file. But even so, I figured that it would just produce, complete garbage, and it went all the way through the tree. So it's like, well, it's better than I thought it was going to be.
What does make describe do?
Make describe is part of make index. It's basically show me the metadata from this port. And since all that is written in makefile glop, if you've made a mistake, make describe will not. We'll give you an error.
Cool, thank you.
So it's basically just, are your metadata sane?
Okay. Well, that is a noble effort. Thank you for that. Thank you, Lasse, for the amazing effort on Kleen. And does anyone else have a final topic, idea, question, concern? The submissions for BSDCan were reportedly of very high quality and solid quantity, such that hopefully there will be a fine conference. Thank you all who perhaps submitted from this group, and all of you listeners. Well, barring all that, would someone like the honors?
I can subscribe.
I need to go.
I also I need to go as a good sign off also. Well, thank you everybody. I will perhaps catch you tomorrow for Open ZFS. Last week's call was fantastic with Rob, and the Beehive calls have had some fantastic GPU pass through. I finally got around to working with that, and Alexi's been invaluable in pushing that forward. So for those who care about such topics, tune in.
That's in
Rob?
Beehive call.
Thursday's Beehive call, yes.